Hello and welcome everyone to Series 9, Episode 5 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Nikki Smith, and with me today I have my co-host Lesley Cara. Hello, Lesley.
Hello, Nikki.
In our last show, Lauren and I talked to Ruth Kelly about her latest novel, The Villa, and the topic was writing on trend. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, then do, because it's a really fantastic episode. But before we kind of go on to our topic for today, we'd like everybody to say hello to Sam Lloyd, who is with us for our extra special bonus episode.
Yes, we like to mix things up a bit and squeeze in one of our favourite authors. So we're delighted to have you with us today, Sam, and to talk about your latest novel, The People Watcher, which certainly lives up to today's topic, which is thrillers with a difference and quirky protagonists. And we wondered if you could start us off by introducing yourself and then just telling us a little bit about your latest novel.
Absolutely. So my name's Sam Lloyd. I am the author. My first thriller was The Memory Wood. I've written another one since called The Rising Tide. And the latest one is The People Watcher, which is a thriller about a young woman who is too frightened to leave the house during the day. And she's very cut off from the outside world. So the way she gives her life meaning is she goes around her town at night, watching the people who live close by, following their lives. And to give her own life meaning, she tries to figure out what she can do to help those who are in need. And there's a whole cast of characters in the town that she watches. And eventually she meets a guy called Louis, who is one of the first people that she's got to know properly. And Louis and her very quickly become friends, and he sees what she does around the town. But he has a slightly different outlook to her, a slightly different philosophy, and where she tries to make people's lives better through helping them, through little small anonymous tasks that she does and little gifts that she leaves. He believes that most people's lives, when they're struggling, are due to other people causing them problems. And he thinks if you really want to help someone, you need to address the problem of other people, and that's where things start to take a much darker turn in the book.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. Now, The People Watcher, as you say, it's your third novel, and like your previous books, it's utterly compelling and also extremely original. Mercy Lake is a wonderful character, damaged and quirky, and although we know from the start that she's committed a criminal act and abducted a young boy, she now watches over him and visits him at night dressed as a fairy. We also get the sense that she's a really good person and a kind person. So could you tell us a little bit about how you came up with her character and such an original storyline?
Well, Mercy Lake, the character, it all actually started with the character of this book. I think sometimes books start with a premise or an idea, and this one really did start with her. And it happened during lockdown. And at that point, I was in the middle of writing my previous book, The Rising Tide. But I think, lockdown was such a strange experience for everyone. And I started getting visited really by this character, and she always popped into my head at night. And I didn't know anything about her other than what I could see originally. She had, one thing I was struck by, she had different colored eyes. And she always turned up on this red tricycle, and I started to think to myself, what were the reasons for this? And I started to look into the, what causes people to have different colored eyes. And sometimes it's just a genetic trait. Other times it's caused by trauma, blunt trauma to the head. And that interested me, and I started to think what might have happened in her past to cause this. And why is she on a tricycle rather than a bike? And that led me to look into balance issues, and slowly this character formed, just bit by bit. And I think because I wasn't under any pressure, because I was writing another book at the time, she sort of percolated over time, and I started finding out more and more about her. And I knew that once I'd figured out what happened in her past, and the fact that she'd been traumatized. And then I realized that what had happened in the past would actually make her far too frightened to go out during the day. I wanted to know where she was now and what she was doing now. And in the book, she's moved to this new town called Crannersford. She shouldn't be there. We don't know why she shouldn't be there at the start, but she's frightened. She's drawn to this place. But as I said earlier, to give her life meaning, she can't help herself. She starts, as she goes out at night, she starts watching this whole cast of characters and finding out what she can do to make their lives better. And there is one family in particular that she watches with a little boy called Ollie Rafferty, and she's particularly drawn to him. And she visits him in the middle of the night, and she knows that she can't let his parents know, so she comes up with these methods to gain his trust and gain his attention by taking him. She takes him little gifts at night and makes sure that there's no chance of her kind of being discovered by her parents, or at least she thinks at the start that there's no chance of being discovered by his parents.
And you're obviously drawn to these very distinctive and memorable characters, because I'm thinking of, in your debut, The Memory Wood, you had Alyssa, didn't you, and Elijah. And I was wondering whether you deliberately set out to create unusual protagonists, or whether they just sort of arrive. Is that your USP, do you think, as an author, to create these sort of endearing, vulnerable oddballs?
I think it's a bit of both. I think in real life I'm always attracted to the stranger characters in the room who've got the most interesting stories, and I think that just then comes through in the sort of characters that I like to write about. I think with the Memory Wood was about two children really who are kind of polar opposites, and one of those characters came to life on the page for me. But the character of Elijah in the Memory Wood had been in my head for years, and I just didn't have a story to put him in. That's for anyone who doesn't know, that's an abduction story about a child chess prodigy who's competing on the most important day of her life, when she's snatched and she wakes up in this dark room and she's tethered to a post, and then she's discovered by this boy playing in his local woods and thinks that she's saved, but the boy has led a very sheltered life and thinks he's just found his first real friend, and so he's reluctant to actually tell the police where she is.
It's a brilliant novel.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I think the twist in it, kind of thing, was so good. It was really, really, I absolutely loved it.
And you were very modest earlier when you were introducing yourself, because The Memory Wood was actually a Richard and Judy book club pick, wasn't it? And you didn't say that, so
it was,
I'm saying it for you.
Absolutely, yes, very well deserved, very well deserved. And location is quite a key element, isn't it, in all your books? So we had the woods in that huge kind of country estate in the Memory Wood, and you had the sea in the Rising Tide, and now we've got the town of Crannersford in the People Watcher. What makes you pick a particular setting? Does it just kind of come to you fully formed, or do you spend a lot of time kind of seeking it out? And do you ever consider, I guess you're quite a visual person, kind of reading your books, I would say, when when I'm reading them, they're very visual. Do you ever think about kind of films and options when you're kind of deciding what to write?
Well, I think on the films thing, I try not to. I try not to think about anything other than telling a story that I'd like to read. Really, that's what I always try to do, is to avoid writing for the market or writing for a TV option or a film option, and just would this entertain me, and if it would, then I'll start writing it. And if I feel like I'm forcing a story, then I'll stop. But I love creating settings, and with the Memory Wood, the most of the action takes place on a country estate or in the woods of a country estate, and it was an important location. I think in the UK, it's always hard to find places where you can put characters in danger, where help is not more than a minute away. And the country estate from the Memory Wood was a useful location for that. But actually, I grew up in a village quite near Southampton, and at the end of our road there was, I mean, it was a little kind of suburban area, but at the end of the road there was this long fence that went on for miles and miles. On the other side of this fence were all these woods that you couldn't go into, and me and friends always used to think, what is over there and what is that place? Why is it roped off and we never ever see anyone in there? And as we got older, we realized it was part of this country estate. And as we got a bit older still, we started to get a bit annoyed at the fact that it was roped off. So on a Friday night, we'd grab sleeping bags and we'd get wood and we'd get some beers and we'd climb the fence and we'd go into the woods and we'd set up camp and stay there for the evenings, and everyone had their own little task. Someone was, would pinch some wood, someone would do the beer. My job was to tell stories around the campfire in
the started early. Yeah.
So because that place was so familiar to me, I mean, it was quite easy then to transplant and use some of those experiences for the woods in the Memory Wood. With this book, The People Watcher, it was I just wanted it to be a fairly standard kind of town in the UK. One important thing it had to have was a hill that Mercy could climb at night and get a vantage point, because she climbs this hill with binoculars and she seeks out people and watches what's going on. And a friend of mine lives in Great Malvern, and there's a hill there called the Beacon. And that's got some great views of the town, and so I kind of had that place in the back of my head as a at the time. But it's like everything, once it's the fun thing is populating a place, and giving things names and giving.
How did you come up with the names for the the places in Cranmer's Ford? You had Pincher's Mount and things like that, and they're really they're just brilliant, fabulous names. Very kind of, again, very visual. Makes you really think about it. How did you come up with them?
Usually, they just pop into my head. Pincher's Mount. I needed a hill. I didn't know why Pincher's Mount suddenly popped into my head, but it just did at that point then. And then I started thinking, if it's Pincher's Mount, who is Pincher? And I mean, all of this is incidental to the book, but when you start thinking about these things and the reasons behind the name, the place starts to feel more real in your head, and that I think that serves me quite well then. So I then started thinking who would be Pincher. So it turns out he's an aristocrat in the sort of 18th century, and he builds a folly on top of this hill. But Mercy's scared of heights. It's not a place that she wants to visit, but I just enjoy that, So something sparks, and then you build a little story around it. And some of these stories you don't end up telling a reader, but the fact that you've thought of them in your head, just for me anyway, it just makes the place more real and more vibrant, and gives me confidence that it's a real place. And I think I have to feel that really to confident telling a story there.
Yeah. Did you draw yourself a map, or was it all in your head?
I do draw my maps sometimes. Yeah, I'm not sure if I did for this one. I think for the other two, I certainly did. I was one of those. I used to be a big Lord of the Rings fan and Tolkien fan when I was a kid. So I was one of the geeky teenagers that had in the back of exercise books would always be maps of places that didn't exist. I used to enjoy doing that. So
oh yes, yeah. I think I heard you say on a previous interview that your favourite book as a child was The Hobbit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, my dad brought that home, and he used to sit at the end of my bed and read a chapter or half a chapter every night, and I always used to ask for more. And yeah, that I think that book triggered my love of writing. Really, I just wanted to be a writer from pretty much the point that happened as a child.
Fantastic. And what I found fascinating was Mercy's fear of daylight and the lengths she goes to avoid it. Really, the blackout blinds in her apartment and everything. I wondered, Is that a common well, how common is that as a phobia? And did you have to do much research into that?
I did some research into, I think it's called heliophobia, is the fear of daylight, or more accurately, the fear of sunlight. And I mean, it can be one of those phobias that just occurs and doesn't seem to have any particular source. But again, a lot of the time it can be triggered by trauma. It can be a traumatic episode. Um, and what tends to happen, actually, and the same thing happens to Mercy, is, a fear of daylight means you don't go out, and of course you don't go out, you don't spend time with many people, and that starts to become an anxiety as well. And so it's a phobia that can often lead to other phobias as well.
Mm.
uh, so I think if a character is experiencing something like that, it's important to be accurate, and and describe it as kind of real world as possible. Although, saying that, I remember reading an article, an interview with Dean Koontz once, who'd written a book about a
I
couple
think I've read that as well. I can't remember what it's called, but it's he can only go out at night, can't he?
like
Has he got some skin condition?
actually, yeah, there's that one. Another one you mean? I think that might be Seize the Night. The one I was thinking of was he'd invented this. It's about I think two brothers who are brought up as if they are one individual,
Oh,
and this brings about huge psychological trauma for them. And he described this where it never, there's no prior examples of this happening, until a few years after the book was published, and then a news story hit, and it had actually happened. The point of the article was that he never takes items from the news and then uses those to write a story. And if he'd read the news article before he'd written the book, he never would have written it.
oh,
In this case, it happened the other way around, where he'd had the idea of this kind of psychological condition, had written the book, and then actually it turned out that there was a real life example afterwards.
fantastic. And Mercy, she's also recovering from a really terrible head injury. Obviously, that's caused some of these problems, and she suffers from blackouts and vertigo, doesn't she? And I think you describe those scenes, those episodes so well, Sam, with such original and inventive language. It's really impressive. And I wondered whether you're the kind of writer, and I think you must be, who spends quite a long while choosing the exact right words and metaphors to convey those things. Do you absolutely love that close line edit to get the exact right words? That's what comes
Yes, I do.
across.
I probably spend, yeah, a lot of time, probably too much time on the, I like, to, I suppose I try to paint, when I paint a scene, I see it visually, but, and I cut a lot out, until I'm just happy with what's left, really. But yeah, I do like playing with words in that kind of, in that visual way.
That really comes across because I remember when I wrote my third novel, The Dare, and the character has epilepsy, and I read to research for that. I read a couple of PhDs that people had done on epilepsy, and one of them was about the use of metaphor and how people use different metaphors to describe epileptic seizures. And so I was really interested reading yours because you use a lot of the images and unusual ways of describing vertigo. It was really, really good, really, really good.
Yeah, well, I
Yes.
mean, Mercy is, she suffers these attacks of vertigo, and usually they are, they come at a time when she's doing something, or she's in a place that she shouldn't be. So it's an additional level of threat for the character, really, that she has to overcome. And initially, Mercy was even more quirky than she is in the final book. Actually, I had to tone her down to some extent, I think, compared to where she was originally. But I mean, she's one of my favorite characters that I've ever written. I think, I've got a real soft spot for her. But yeah, it's I suppose I just tried to put myself in that position and think, well, what would it be like for that to happen to somebody all the time?
Having most of the action take place at night, it really lends the novel that kind of sinister creepiness. Did you spend a lot of time outside at night? That sounds a really weird question, but kind of absorbing like all the kind of smells and sounds. How do you do it? Do you just imagine it, or do you actually kind of go out and stand outside and take everything in?
I do a bit of that actually. I mean, the book is set in the middle of summer, and summer at night. It's night has a particular smell to it. It has a completely different feel, and I liked the fact that this book would be predominantly set at night, and so yes, I did. I mean, particularly at lockdown. I think when I was coming up with the idea for the character, I would go out in the evening and sit in the garden for a bit and just try to get a bit of normality. And but also when I was at university, I had a job in security to make ends meet at night in buildings. So I would go and I would go to a building at 7 o'clock in the evening, and I'd take my laptop with me at the time, and I'd be the guy on site until 7 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, it was a perfect job for somebody who wanted to be a writer, because all I had to do was sit behind a desk and do a tour of the premises once an hour, phone in and say that I was okay and we hadn't been burgled, and then for the rest of the time I could just sit there and write. But those nighttime experiences, I mean, sometimes it used to be a little bit, you'd hear sounds and you think, what was that? I'm the only one here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I did spend. I mean, I tend to be quite a nighttime person.
Oh,
Probably.
that's interesting. I was going to ask that actually, because obviously Mercy divides people into kind of night people or day people. So you'd say you were a night person.
I think. I think naturally I would be. It's hard to these days with a couple of kids.
Yes, I was going to say, with 3 young children, it's pretty hard, isn't it, to be a night
Yeah,
person?
yeah. I mean, before that, I think my natural body clock would always add an hour and add an hour every day until I was probably living in the evenings. And actually, when I was first trying to get published, the only time I had available really was at night to write. So I used to sit up quite late, and it was just me and the house was quiet to
Yeah.
just at a time.
I love the way Mercy gives people, all the people that she watches and cares for at night, she gives them really funny nicknames, doesn't she? Like we've got Lovesick Linda, for example. And it made me think that was well, it's an endearing characteristic of hers, I think. And it made me think that that's quite a writerly thing to do, isn't it? Because, giving people nicknames, creating stories about them, which she does, she pieces together the narratives of their lives, doesn't she, and what's happened to them and why they might need her help. And I thought it was also quite a clever device for helping the reader remember the stories. And I wondered if that was a deliberate intention of yours, or whether that just sort of, it was just an idea that came to you.
No, I think busted on all three counts really. I think yeah. I mean, I think probably all writers are eavesdroppers, and love nothing more than listening to a conversation between strangers and then filling in the blanks. And I love doing that. I particularly love doing that when I'm abroad. Actually, I try to you observe someone, you try to guess their nationality or guess their story, and then you hear them speak and you realise you're completely wrong. But it's funny at the time. But with this book and Mercy's habit of naming people, as the nature of the plot, she's following a lot of different people. And one thing that I find frustrating sometimes, if I'm reading a book that's got a big cast of characters, and particularly if it's a thriller where we are hurtling along at a certain pace, there's lots of characters, and I sometimes you hit, who's this? What, I can't remember this, and I have to flip back through the book to try to find the last chapter they appear in and do that, and it kind of takes me out of the narrative. So I was worried about that with this. So I think initially it started as a way of the way. I mean, Mercy doesn't know these people. She's only come across their lives through, observing them. And actually, some of her observations of these people and some of her assumptions about these people will turn out to be completely wrong, but she knows them as effectively the characters that she's invented them to be. And so the device of giving them those names, is in one sense an aspect of her personality and her character, because that's the kind of person she is. But it's also, I thought it would as well help the reader, because
it does.
as soon as you meet one of these characters and she says their name again, Lovesick Linda, that's the character that she's following, who has an abusive ex-husband, and she's trying to do something about that. It immediately would be a memory prompt as well, so we can get kind of straight into the next stage of that particular little story without a load of
it's a really clever technique, actually, really clever. And we can't really talk about the People Watcher without asking you about Louis. So charismatic Louis, who befriends Mercy and helps her with her mission to keep watch over the residents of Crowner's Ford. But his methods are a little bit different to Mercy's. So do you want to tell us a little bit about his character?
Yeah. So up until the point that the book opens in kind of present day, Mercy is leading a very solitary life for reasons obviously of trauma, but she's moved to this town and she shouldn't really be there, and she knows she's going to be in a lot of troubles, and so that's a yet another reason that she's keeping herself to herself. But when we first meet, or when she first meets Louis, she's just in a petrol station at night, picking up some supplies, and she's harassed by a group of young lads. And there is a guy filling up his VW camper on the forecourt, and he intervenes, and it's Louis. And Mercy's initial instinct is just to get away as quickly as possible. She's thankful to him for intervening, but she leaves. But before she does leave, she says something that would allow him to track her down, which eventually he obviously does. And they start this very tentative relationship, and it's really tentative because she's finding it extremely difficult to trust anyone. But he, once he realizes, as I said earlier, what she likes to do, he starts to get involved. His philosophy on how to help people is completely different to hers, and is much more focused around punishment. And she's fascinated by him. She's fascinated by his methods and his confidence, and he's really her alter ego. He's everything, or she certainly thinks he's everything that she isn't. And so almost by degrees, his influence is corrupting on her, and suddenly her life in the town starts to become more and more threatened by the things that they are doing at night. And the more, as we get further into the book, then Louis' interactions and interventions with the strangers in the town that Mercy has been watching become more and more extreme, and therefore were more and more fun to write. Actually, that's when
yes, I bet. Yes, it certainly takes a darker turn, doesn't it? And we can't say too much, obviously, because I don't want to give any spoilers away. But it's a very interesting relationship, isn't it? With good and bad aspects. Yeah, he was a brilliant character. I was also very, very interested and quite terrified, actually, by the Nadia and Tapia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Tapia?
Yeah.
Tapia?
Yeah, Tapia.
Tapia, their storyline. And their rather unusual and, I don't want to give too much away, and painful transactional nature of their relationship. Can you tell us a little bit about, as much as you want to tell us, without giving too many spoilers, but tell us about the genesis of Tapia and what inspired his particular fetish, shall we say?
Yes, it's okay. So, just to fill in a few blanks, Nadia is the mother of the young boy that Mercy visits at night, and thinks that she's being very, very careful and very, very clever in the way that she's keeping herself hidden. So she has no idea that Nadia, the mother, has actually cottoned on to the fact that her son or her stepson is being watched at night, and Nadia has a childhood friend called Tapia, who has a much darker past than anyone in the book, and and then recruits him to actually find out, what is exactly going on and put a stop to it. And so the character of Tapia was the opportunity to pose a real threat to Mercy's safety in the book, and so he is a very, very dark character, and I don't know where that came from.
I think it's lockdown frustration, Sam.
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things my wife does when she ever reads, I mean, she always reads my first drafts, and her reaction is always the same, which is, I'm more frightened about you than I was before I read this. I'm more disturbed about the person I married, and I don't know where this comes from. No, I don't either. But the relationship they have is they are childhood friends, and she is very popular in her village where they grew up, and the only boy that doesn't seem to show any interest in her is Tapia, and that completely frustrates her. But the relationship they have, she finally realizes that his only interest is in burning things and in burning people, and she allows him to give her one or two cigarette burns, and from that this relationship develops that's very, very strange. And when she invites him back into Craner's Ford as an adult, they haven't seen each other in years, but she's asking him to help her, and he obviously will want something as a result of that. So their relationship is
He is quite terrifying, Sam. I think you've done a brilliant job with him. I mean, I think he's yet another example of your incredible cast of characters and misfits. I'm with your wife. I'm a bit worried. No, I'm only joking. We've all got these dark minds, or we wouldn't be writing crime, would we?
Exactly.
Yes. Thriller writers, I think, are the nicest people, but nobody can believe that they write such kind of dark things, I think, underneath.
But I think that's how we exercise our demons, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes.
And then we're we feel cured.
Yes. And can you tell us a little bit about your life before you became a writer, and how you ended up penning thrillers for Transworld?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I've always, literally from the age of 5 or 6, I started writing down things and writing stories and telling stories. And I don't think I'm ever happier than when I'm sitting around a campfire with friends, just telling stories. And writing is the opportunity to do that on a bigger scale, isn't it? Really. And that continued all the way through to university until the point that I needed to actually make a living, and I ended up I left university with debts and wanting to pay off the debts pretty fast. I ended up working in, I think, media sales for about a year, selling advertising space, and then I went into advertising. And it's one of those things where suddenly 10, 15 years has gone by, and I haven't done any writing for the first time in my life. And I suddenly had a moment where I thought, if I don't do this now, the time is just going to go, and it'll be too late. And it wasn't ideal at the time, because I think my wife was pregnant with our third. But I had to talk to her, and she said, "Well, look, however difficult it is, we'll find some time." And so I used to, as I said, write in the evenings once the house was quiet. I used to take my laptop on the train in the morning and read what I'd written the night before. I used to go into coffee shops at lunchtime and try and do a bit of editing. And over the course of 2 years, I had a book. And I had never enjoyed the advertising lifestyle, and I couldn't wait to try and get out. And when I sold my first, it was the opportunity to go, let's take a chance on this. You might never get the opportunity again. I don't know how long it's going to last, but at least I can say I did it. And that's how things started, and that's what kind of where I am now.
Fantastic. Yeah. So yes, I had quite a similar journey actually, except I was doing accountancy rather than advertising. And I'm a morning person rather than an evening person, so I was kind of getting up at kind of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to write mine before the kind of work and everything else. So yes. And are you a planner? I've heard that you're not a particularly meticulous planner, and you just kind of go with the flow. Is that true?
It's I'd say it's I hate the way I write in a way. I hate my lack of planning. I every time I start a new book, I think like this is going to be different. This time I'm going to lay it all out in advance. I'm going to have a structure. I know where I'm going from the very first page. Um, and then I spend, and suddenly weeks have gone by and I'm no closer to anything. The idea is still burning in the back of my head to start. And eventually I think to myself, right, shelve everything and just start writing. And then I do start writing. And then from the first page into the last page, it's an utterly terrifying process because I've might have a slight sense of where I'm going, but not much. And there have been times when I've written myself into a dead end and have to backtrack, but it's the only way I can do it. And I think that slight sense of fear about where is this going is almost a bit of a necessary ingredient for me. And I think if I knew exactly where the story was going and I'd mapped it all out, from start to finish, I wouldn't really have much interest in telling the story because I think for most of us, we're writing for ourselves at the end of the day, the story that we want to read. And if I know exactly what's going to happen at every stage, then there's no really need to tell it.
Oh, I identify so much with that, particularly that every new novel you think, this will be different, I'll be organised, I won't get into a pickle ever again, and you always do.
Exactly.
100% identify with that. So what's next on the horizon, Sam? Are you writing a fourth book? Are you able to tell us anything about it, or do you like to keep it under wraps until
I can tell you a bit. I still am a bit really superstitious about talking about anything about what I was writing about, for that very idea that the idea right at the start, the idea always feels quite a fragile thing that could just evaporate if you're not careful with it. And talking about it too much makes it evaporate as well sometimes. And also when I have talked, sometimes I've talked to somebody about an idea and I realize that I'm watching them really closely to see what their reaction is. And whatever their reaction is, I'll think, oh, that's not the reaction I wanted. And
I was just going to say that it's going, it's like telling someone what you're going to call your child or something, isn't it? And then that kind of like blank face of like, oh, really?
Yeah.
And you go, oh, okay, then I won't do that. Yeah.
Well, I did that with a child one. We were thinking about calling our child this, and the person said, "Oh, I knew someone who was called that, and they died."
Well, everybody dies, don't they? I mean,
and I couldn't stop thinking about that afterwards. And actually, we didn't use that.
Gosh.
But so as I say, I'm a bit.
Don't tell us if you'd rather not.
It's fine because actually these days editors always ask the question, and then you have to have a bit of a conversation about it. So what I can say is that I'm kind of conscious. The last two books, the main character has been a young woman, and the book to that previous to that, the memory would, there was a young girl and a young boy. The idea I've got for the fourth one is a father-son relationship where the son has done something that the father is trying to help him cover up, and it's a relationship that I haven't written about before, and I've just started it, and it's in its first kind of chapters at the moment, but it's good fun. I don't really want to say much more than that.
That's absolutely fine.
That sounds brilliant. Fine. Yeah, and it's nice to, because I was just thinking, you write quirky women really, really well. So I'd be really interested to read the next one. So hurry up and write it.
Yes. And we always like to end by asking our guests what books they've read recently. Is there anything that they recommend? But before I was going to actually ask you that, as an author drawn to quirky characters, are there any famous fictional characters you love reading for their odd personalities and behaviour?
I think I've mentioned Dean Koontz once already, and the reason that he probably pops into my head quite a lot is because when I was a kid, I used to read everything by him and go and buy everything by him. I used to read everything by Stephen King as well.
Stephen King, yeah.
But my parents used to stop me at the door with Stephen King library books, and so I used to have to smuggle those in. Dean Koontz wasn't as much on their radar, so I used to get away with that a little bit more. And so these days he's actually one of my kind of comfort reads, really. And he wrote a series of books. The first one is called Odd Thomas, and the character of Odd Thomas, it's like a supernatural thriller series, and the character of Odd Thomas is this young man called Odd, and he when people die in tragic circumstances or in violent circumstances, they come and haunt him until he agrees to go and figure out what happened to them, and make sure the actual people are punished for the crime. And he's a really relentlessly upbeat character, really quirky. I mean, he's got the name Odd Thomas. He's also haunted by Elvis Presley, the ghost of Elvis Presley, who never speaks to him but just hangs around in the background looking sad. And just a fantastic character, really quirky, and I love the relentlessly upbeat nature of the character. And another one actually that I tend to remember characters when they're written in the first person, I think, and that series of books is another character that I really liked. And I as I said, upbeat characters stick in my head. And the character in the Martian by
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that kind of, all this bad stuff is happening, and I'm just gonna try and get through it. So yeah, those are characters that kind of stick in my head, I suppose.
Brilliant. And is there anything that you've read recently that you'd like to tell us about? Any particular books?
Yeah, I've just finished The Trap by
That's up here. Yeah,
yeah,
Catherine Ryan Howard.
Catherine Ryan
Catherine Ryan
Howard,
Howard.
yes.
Yeah, I just literally finished it a couple of days ago, and I was blown away by it. And I
Yeah.
think it comes out in August, I think.
I think, yeah, August is amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's a book that's probably difficult to talk about without spoilers. But
Mm.
what blew me away about it really was that so it's the story of a young woman whose sister was abducted,
Yeah.
and it's never been found, and she decides that the way she's going to try and solve this is to go to the same area every night where her sister was abducted and try to get abducted by the same person, so she can figure out so she can solve the mystery of what happened to her sister. And it reads like a fast thriller, and but there's a point in it where it just becomes real, and I don't want to say much more than that, but for fear of spoilers, but it turns on its head.
Turns on his head. Yeah, it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic book. Yeah.
So that's, and I've just had delivered Yellowface. So
Oh, Yellowface. I loved that. Loved it. Yeah, I listened to the Audible version. It was brilliantly narrated. Loved it. Yeah.
great.
And how about you, Lesley? Have you read anything recently that
Apart
you
from
liked?
Yellowface, which I read while I was on holiday, or listened to while I was on holiday, I'm about to start Demon Copperfield, which is the one that's just won the Women's Prize, but a Barbara Kingsolver novel, which is a retelling of a reimagining rather, of the Dickens David Copperfield, set in the Appalachian Mountains, I believe. So I'm looking forward to that. And I also really want to read the next Doug Johnston. He writes the series of the Skelf family, and his latest, I think it's called Black Hearts. I think it's been shortlisted for the Theakston's Old Peculier Award. It's one of the shortlistees. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into that. And two more proofs I've been sent BP Walters' Notes on a Disappearance, which sounds really fascinating, and Emma
I've
Curtis.
read that. Yeah,
Have you?
it was
Have
really
you?
good. Really
And
enjoyed
Emma
it.
Curtis
Really
is
enjoyed
the
it.
babysitter.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yes.
quite a
Yes,
few
that's
to get through. What about you,
yes.
Nikki? So you've read Notes on a Disappearance.
I'm completely swamped with structural edits at the moment. So yes, my last couple of weeks have been my own book over and over and over again. So yes, I could tell you a lot about that, but you really don't want to know about that at the moment. So yes, I've also got a couple of proofs on my pile. It's kind of piling up a bit, but I can't wait to read Emma Curtis's The Babysitter. I really love her book. So yeah, that's definitely on my list. Yes.
Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, it's time to draw this to a close now. And thank you so much, Sam, for coming on. We've really enjoyed talking to you and having you on our special bonus episode. And we wish you huge success with The People Watcher and urge all our listeners and viewers to go out right this minute and buy a copy because it's brilliant.
Thanks so much.
Yes, I have absolutely loved chatting to you, Sam. It's fascinating, and I can't wait to see what kind of quirky characters you come up with for your next book. So, listeners, viewers, subscribers, do get in touch across any of our social media channels if you'd have any topics that you'd like us to cover in the future. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please rate and review us on whatever platform you're listening or watching on so that others can find us.
That's right. So now, sadly, it's goodbye from Sam.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from Nikki.
Bye.
And goodbye from me.